Hey everyone, thanks for watching. If you'd like to see more Hemi Sync podcasts, such as Episode 8 with Dean Radin, podcasts that aren't necessarily associated with any particular Hemi Sync product, but simply feature fascinating guests and subjects associated with the frontiers of consciousness research and understanding, please consider joining our exclusive Patreon page and get some great discounts on Hemi Sync products in the bargain. Thanks for watching. We're joined today by Deborah Bromley. Deborah is a UK-based author and hypnotherapist who specializes in life between lives therapy. She helps clients to access trance states and altered states of consciousness in order to work with their own spiritual guides. Her new Hemi Sync release is called Creating a Positive Future. So please welcome Deborah Bromley. So Deborah, thanks for joining us. I was hoping maybe we could just start with a bit about your background. I know that you began your career as an environmental health officer. How did you take that segue into doing what you're doing now?
Well, I was an environmental health officer. I'm not sure you have those kind of professions in America, Garrett, because I think maybe the functions are a bit split up. But I started after I left school, went to university and studied environmental health, which is to do with policing the public health. So it's to do with housing, rented housing. It's to do with food safety, noise and pollution, health and safety, drains, rats, and all kinds of things like that.
Okay.
That was really interesting, and I did it full time for 20 years, 25 years, and I specialised in housing. I love houses. I wish I had more of them actually. And I used to meet some very vulnerable people, because the kind of houses that I used to be interested in were houses that had homeless people in, or people who would be homeless, living in one room perhaps, or single mums, the kind of people who, maybe there were drug problems or mental health problems. And I wanted to help them. I think everybody wants to help people, when they're in that situation. So maybe I'd have been called because the hot water wasn't working, or there are rats running in the back kitchen. But actually, what I really, really longed to do was to say, come on, let's see if we can get you out of this mess. And they would talk to me. And as a result of that, I realized that I really didn't understand what they were thinking. I mean, that's it really. I remember the time when I was like scratching my head. There was a single mum. She'd left home, or her mum had kicked her out. I mean, this is quite, difficult situation for me to talk about, and obviously very much for her. She had a young child. I was trying to get through to her. How did you end up here? Why did you row with your mum? I was quite pushy in those days. And I was going through her choices, and I really couldn't understand because Garrett, and I'm going to be totally honest here, I wouldn't have made those choices. And I realized almost in a split second that I had no idea how this young girl thought, or I couldn't empathize with her feelings. So I needed to know, and that was what drove me really to seek out some extra training to try and make me a better environmental health officer, but also to be able to advise people how to get on with their lives and how to get out of the holes that they dug themselves in. So, and this is the enlightenment moment, if you like. I was surfing the internet like you do on a Sunday evening, glass of wine in hand maybe, and I was surfing psychology degrees, all kinds of things like that. Top of my search results, hypnotherapy. And goodness me, that's exciting. It has an air of mystery. Like a child in a sweetie shop, and I signed up pretty much there and then. So that's the story. And of course, as soon as I started training, as anybody who's studied any of the talking therapies will know, the answers start to come to you about how people think, how people feel, how people take their life paths, and what we can do to help people make better choices, what we can do to make ourselves make better choices. Because of course, it's a journey of self-discovery and very much sort of self-revelation.
And so these people that you came into contact with, these people that were in trouble, were they receptive to hypnotherapy or these different modalities that you wanted to approach them with?
Oh no, I had to leave to do it.
Okay.
You can imagine, well, walking into my boss's office and saying, oh, by the way, I'm going off to study hypnotherapy for a while. Do you still want to employ me?
Gotcha.
I don't think I actually said that, but I think they thought I was a bit mad.
Uh-huh.
It was time for me to go and to, pursue a different career, really. So that's what I did. But I never forgot that feeling of puzzlement as to how do people get themselves into such a mess?
Right.
And what's going on in their minds to make them make those choices.
Gotcha.
That may sound a little bit patronizing, but that was how I felt at the time. Well, of course, after I fixed their hot water system and got rid of the rats in the back kitchen.
Right. Well, I think what you're getting at is that we often act from a place unconsciously due to various types of patterning that we might have, or programming that we might have based on our history and our past experience, and it causes us to act in ways that maybe aren't in our best interest, or act from a place that we're not fully aware of. Am I stating that? Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But of course, the key thing that we want to know is there something that we can do to help?
Right.
And that's what I really wanted to know. Obviously, I did actually go back to my environmental health work some years later because they were short-staffed and, I wanted more full-time work. So I did my hypnotherapy alongside my environmental health. They seemed quite happy about that. Of course, what I found was I was much better equipped to empathize with people who were in a tight spot and help them think more positively.
Yeah. So what did you find as you started to delve into this type of work?
What, hypnotherapy?
Yeah, and I guess you also got involved with NLP, or neuro-linguistic programming, yes. Right?
I think we all, in my view, NLP is definitely the foundation stone of hypnotherapy and talking therapies. It tells us so much about how the human mind works. And I have to pay tribute to, those pioneers, Bandler and Grinder and all their associates for the fantastic work they did. And I think about NLP a lot. I know that sounds a bit weird.
Yeah.
Just come out with a presupposition of NLP, just to illustrate a point. It's truly fascinating, and yes, it was part of the course, and I think it's very, very important that we stay true to those kind of roots.
Well, it's my understanding that a lot of very successful coaches have backgrounds in NLP and employ techniques that are grounded in NLP. I believe Tony Robbins, for instance, is much of his work is based on that. But
it's very popular in this country, very popular, particularly in business. And,
very interesting. So, with that as your foundation, what initially drew you to Hemi Sync?
Okay, well, I trained in 1999, and I had a supervisor, and she recommended a Hemi Sync track and Hemi Sync products for me to listen to for personal development. So I have been a Hemi Sync fan for nearly 20 years now. So yes, it's not a recent thing. I started to listen to guided meditations, and I enjoyed the music particularly. I have my favorites. I put them on when I'm writing or, when I want to relax. And of course, when I started seeing clients, Hemi Sync was a tremendous resource for me because, of course, when you're working with clients, they're used to hearing your voice talking. To be quite honest, sometimes they need a bit of light relief. And a Hemi Sync guided meditation is perfect because it gives variety. And also clients need to practice a lot, I've found, in order to get where they want to go. So I would be able to recommend Hemi Sync, of course, because of the interesting aspect that I knew it would really help them with their trance work.
Yeah.
I think that's the main value. I mean, you know, to be able to, when clients come, and often the first thing they will say is, I'm not sure I can be hypnotized. I worry that I can't slow my mind down. And you reassure them that everybody can do it. It just takes practice. And if you can go to sleep at night, you automatically pass through the state of somnambulism, which represents working hypnosis for therapy purposes. But nevertheless, giving them or encouraging them to buy a Hemi Sync track, actually, and with the the special frequencies, helps them to learn for themselves how to go into trance. So even though this sounds very much like an advertisement, this is what happened to me. So I've been a huge fan for all those years. That's what drew me to Hemi Sync, particularly in relation to this track that I've recorded. I was listening to one of your best-selling tracks, lying on the bed. And a voice came into my head, and it said, "You should do this." No, I'm not joking. And you know that voice. When that voice tells you to do something,
you have to answer.
Ignore it, because it will keep on and on and on until you actually do what you're told. So I just sent an email and had a positive response, and here we are today. So that's my Hemi Sync story.
That's a great story. So. When you're trying to work with clients, you're trying to help them access a specific state of consciousness that you describe as a trance state. So that means different things to different folks. How would you describe a trance state?
Oh, now you're asking me to define hypnosis. That's a tricky one. There's a lot of definitions, but I'm not going to try and define it, because I know that people measure brain waves and are able to say, well, in this state, this is a trance state, that's a trance state.
Right.
We call working trance somnambulism, after the sort of Greek for sleep. I think it's Greek. And it's a point in consciousness where the conscious mind relaxes to a point where it won't interfere.
Right.
And the therapist is able to start to work with the unconscious mind.
Yeah.
I found when you have to explain it to clients, and I think this is a good explanation for anybody who perhaps doesn't really understand about what trance is, or thinks it's something strange or something that they can't do. Because we all have computers nowadays, and we understand that computers have virus software and they have firewalls. Now, your conscious mind can sometimes act like a firewall. And keep good things out. And in order to have effective therapy, the hypnotherapist needs to almost like to take that firewall down for the period of time that they're working with the client, and therefore get access to the unconscious mind, the huge database where all the emotions, the memories, all the information that is making the client have whatever symptoms they're having. So for me, working trance is really what counts, because altered states exist, many different kinds of altered states for all different kinds of purposes. So pluralism is my thing.
Right. So we kind of have what we call a mind awake, body asleep state, which I describe as a trance state. But you actually point out an important distinction here, and that is between the type of mind awake that we're describing here, which is really bypassing ordinary consciousness, or the firewall, as you put it, as opposed to a mind awake state that most people would kind of think of as being mind awake, which is walking around having a conversation like we're having, or going to work. We don't mean that type of mind awake. This is a different type of mind awake that bypasses your ordinary consciousness.
Yeah, and you need to be able to get past that firewall. We call it the critical faculty, which is the mind's protection to stop unwanted material from getting into the unconscious. It's complicated, but simple in practice, of course.
Right. And so,
and of course, when we're talking about other altered states, there's, from experience, and I think when you talk to people about it, they can easily identify when they're in other different states of consciousness. For example, when they're driving on a route that they regularly drive, and they find that they get there and they don't even know how they got there. And you know that they're in a light trance, and their unconscious mind is running the very beautiful driving program that allows them to get from their home to the shops or the school or whatever it is, and they don't have to engage their conscious mind at all. And that's a good example when you want people to understand what the unconscious mind is capable of and what the conscious mind's role is, what it does.
So we spoke a bit earlier about what actually motivates people's actions and how that relates to their programming. And so I take it that you find that it's a lot easier to change that programming from this trance state. Is that accurate?
Yes, very much so. And of course, when you study hypnotherapy, hypnotherapy is two words. It's hypno, of course, which is to do with accessing the trance state, and then the therapy. And we learn many, many different therapeutic techniques, some of which are used in other talking therapies, like in the child work, for example, some of which are NLP techniques. But the difference is, of course, with the trance, it makes the therapy faster and, in my view, more effective.
Yeah, we definitely agree.
So, good trance, that's what we like to experience.
Right. And so, given that background, how has all of that informed this track that you've put together called Creating a Better Future, or Creating a Positive Future, right?
Positive Future.
Yeah.
So I've worked with clients now for nearly 20 years, and everybody is different. Everybody comes with their own different issues, and it's inevitable that you start to generate some original material, some original tracks. If somebody comes, they have an issue that's unique, and you don't have a script or you don't have a treatment protocol that will be suitable for them, you have to start writing things yourself. And of course, because I love writing and I love words, I found that I love to write hypnotherapy scripts. So I started to write my own hypnotherapy scripts. Now, this Creating a Positive Future track, I have thought about how I would describe it, and it came about because I had a most lovely client who did really, really well. And at the end, she was going off to start her life, having healed all her issues. She was full of positivity. And me being a giving kind of person, I wanted to give her something to mark, the end or the celebration of her going off into the world. Think of it like a sort of a hypnosis box of chocolates or a bouquet. Anyway, I designed this thing specifically for her, and it was to help her to attract all the lovely good things into her life that she felt had been missing. And it's of course, I've refined it a lot since then, but that was the purpose of it. And of course, as more clients came along, I was able to give them the same track and say, look, keep up with your hypnosis because it's going to stand you in good stead. Here is something that you can listen to, and I wish you all good things, and I want you to flourish. And if you listen to this track, you will be able to work on attracting good things into your life. So that's where it comes from. And so for that reason, it's very dear to my heart, because I have very fond memories of all those lovely people that I worked with. So in essence, I suppose it is manifesting, but I like to think of it as more than manifesting, because it contains lots of different hypnotherapy techniques and ideas that work on nourishing the person at a very deep level. Yeah. I guess the main thing that I want to get across in it is the idea that people do have personal power. People do have energy, even if they think they have no choices, there's nowhere for them to go, that no good things are going to happen to them in life. They work on their power, their personal power, their right to determine the course of their life. And you can do this using simple breathing techniques, imagining techniques. Yeah. But you work on making that power grow. And very soon you realize, yes, I can choose a different path. I can have a better life. I can start to attract good things into my life.
Right.
So that's where I started with it. And then extra bits have been added as I've gone along. So.
Right. And so what was interesting to me, and it sounds like, the inspiration for this was from a beautiful source. So it does sound like a manifestation exercise, but it begins almost like an out-of-body exercise, so a different state of consciousness. And so what was the thinking or the inspiration behind that? Because that is unique.
The flying bit.
Yeah, the flying bit.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know where that came from, Garrett, honestly. It was in the original script that I wrote. And I wanted to put a suggestion into the track of not so much out of body, but the idea of freedom.
Yeah.
And of course, I mean, I'm not going to put you on the spot with this question, but I think many of us have experienced dreams where we have been flying. Maybe this is connected with astral projection. Maybe it's just a snippet of an idea. And I certainly have experienced flying dreams. And what I wanted to do, in hypnosis, we often use metaphor. So the flying is a metaphor for freedom. It's a metaphor for that feeling of being unlimited and that you can do anything. So it has two purposes. It's to help the client to understand that they have the freedom to make better choices, freedom to have a better life. And it's also to give them that higher perspective, if you like, because during the track they can fly and they can look down on themselves in a sort of an imaginary scene. So that's why I put that in, and I have to say, when I listen to it, I enjoy it very much, because it does remind me of well, where did I get those wings from? That's what I want to say. It's meant to be enjoyable. It's meant to be enjoyable, and that's what I hope that part achieves. So.
Yeah, and it certainly is, and it sounds like it serves multiple purposes. I do think it's a lot easier to have a feeling of freedom and less connection with your patterning or your history when you're in that type of a state. So that makes a lot of sense. And so are you incorporating elements of both hypnotherapy and NLP into the Descriptiveness meditation?
Yes, I mean, I think it's inevitable that happens. So, because NLP, it's in every therapeutic technique. So, yes, you kind of weave the different parts into the script. I always try, I mean, this is just a sort of a professional comment, really, but I always try and keep it nice and simple. When you're writing something that people are going to listen to on a CD or they're going to stream, it's got to reach everybody's imagination. You can't make it too complicated. You can't use images that are too difficult for people to grasp hold of. And so simple imagery, and then also from an NLP perspective, bringing in the different senses. Because as we know from, I don't know, what the main thing NLP teaches us is that people do use their senses differently. So somebody might be a very visual person, for example, and then visual imagery is very important to them. Or somebody might rely more on their ears, so auditory content. Or somebody might have a kinesthetic profile, and therefore sensing and body feelings are more important for them. So, I hope I've woven those parts into the track.
You certainly did. And kind of further to that point, at one point you suggest combining the specific things you want in your life with the overall quality of your life and deeper meaning, then wrapping it into a symbol. What is the purpose and power behind that?
That's a complicated question, and I'll do my best to answer it. So, and I can answer it from personal experience, and probably that's the best way to understand what this part is about. When we think to ourselves, I really want something in my life, So maybe our life is bobbling along and we think to ourselves, do you know what? Oh, I really, really want a new job. Oh, I'm so bored with my job. Mm-hmm. This is how the mind works. We know that mind starts its little dialogue up. And then we start to wish for the new job. So a person listening to my track might start off with that idea. I'm going to try and manifest a new job in my life, and I'm going to wish for it and see if I can attract it. Mm. Then what happens is, once you start to work on that, I ask you to think about why, to think about what exactly you want from the new job. And it may be that you're bored with your old job, or the hours aren't very good, or the money's not very good. Maybe you want more free time, or maybe you wish, to have freedom from, money worries, for example. Mm. So that part is the quality behind the thing. So when we're wishing for something in our lives, it's usually we're wishing for a physical thing. We're wishing for something material. And then if you look behind that, because what I believe is that the universe, and this is a saying, and I'm sure you've heard it many, many times before, that the universe is benevolent and has our own best interests at heart. What I also believe is that the universe will give us the essence of what we want, and not necessarily, and we have to be open, if you like. And I put this in the track, we have to be open about how that blessing, if you like, is going to come into our lives. So we may have fixated on a particular thing that we want to attract. Mm. And yet the universe may know, perhaps it knows us better, the universe may bestow that essence in a slightly different way. So we do have to keep an open mind. Does that bit make sense?
Yes.
It's about higher feelings, really. Higher feelings rather than, because, manifesting, you could think about manifesting as being quite a selfish thing, for example, couldn't you? Oh, let's just, I'll attract this and I'll attract that. But it's not. It's a very spiritual thing. Mm-hmm. It's helping you to get closer to the purpose of your life and your destiny. And I'll just mention the symbol because you asked about that specifically. Mm-hmm. In the work that I do, the Life Between Lives regression, which is a very deep soul journey to take you to remember the time in between incarnations, and maybe we'll talk about that a bit later.
Yeah.
But in soul communication, symbols are very, very important. When a spiritual being is trying to communicate a complex idea or a concept that maybe involves many hundreds or thousands of words to a being who is embodied like we are now, sometimes a simple way to do that is using a symbol, an image or a picture or something quite universal. I'll give you an example, and these aren't hard things to work out. An example of a bee, a simple bee. Yeah. Do we think about a bee? We think about it as being very busy, buzzing around, collecting nectar from flowers. And that symbol, if shown to, by a spiritual being, could denote that the person needs to slow down a little bit, or just recognition that they're very busy or busy times. Does that make sense?
It does.
So the symbol can sometimes particularly convey many, many complex ideas. I just wanted to put the symbol into the track.
Right.
Because it serves a useful purpose, because when you've got a symbol, when you're able to kind of refine what you want, it gives you something to lock into. It gives you something as an emblem almost, to denote, what you're wishing for.
Right. So it sounds like it's a means of nonverbal communication, a means of bypassing your ordinary conscious mind, a means of communicating a lot of information-dense subject matter succinctly, and also a tool for maybe reinforcing the experience later in a way that is simple and accessible.
Yeah, that's right.
So you touched on what is actually now your primary work in dealing with clients, right? It's life between life regression, which I guess is also connected with your work with the Newton Institute.
That's right.
Yeah. Can you tell us a bit about that and how that might impact this exercise?
Are you familiar with Dr. Newton's work at all?
A little bit. I mean, I've browsed the website and I'm familiar with the background.
Yeah.
But tell our listeners what it's about.
Okay. very much like Robert Monroe, Dr. Michael Newton was a great pioneer, and now sadly passed away a couple of years ago. He was a counselor, a traditional hypnotherapist. He wasn't really interested in past life work. He was mostly interested in just helping people with their ordinary everyday problems. And almost by accident, and he describes this in the introduction to his books, almost by accident, in hypnosis, he gave what we call a command. A command given in trance, like go here, imagine that, feel this. It's a very direct instruction. He gave a command in trance to a young lady he was working with, and she went straight from wherever she was talking about in her head to the afterlife. It's quite an emotional story, because she'd come to Dr. Newton because she felt lonely and she didn't have any close companions in her current life, and she hadn't made any bonds or relationships. She wasn't married. She felt very, very lonely indeed. And she described with tears in her eyes how when she remembered being in the afterlife, she could see all her soul friends because they were all there. You know, we could say she was like flying solo in that particular life. She was being independent and learning how to live on earth, but her soul friends were in heaven. So that started Michael off very much realizing that he had hit on something interesting, and he practiced and refined his technique, and then started to work on clients. And Michael regressed over 7,000 people during the course of his career, and all of them to the life between lives state, which, just to clarify again, after you die, so if we were doing past life regression, you would take the person through the past life to the death scene, and then do some healing and wrap it up, and then bring them round. Well, with life between lives, we take the client beyond the past life to remember when they rose up from Earth's astral plane and made the progression through to the afterlife, or you know, whatever you like to call it. And Michael found that as he regressed more clients, he found that they started to talk about similar things happening to them, almost like when we rise up after a life on Earth, we go through a debriefing session with our guide, and what his clients called a council of elders, like a higher group of souls who are you know, taking a longer term view, maybe over many lives. And then you go back to meet with your soul friends who are waiting for you and welcoming you with a party atmosphere. There were various other things that happened. So Michael built up this body of work over 7,000 different regressions, and it represents a huge subjective view, because of course all the people who were regressed gave their own personal views. We can't measure whether it was right or wrong, but nevertheless, it represents a huge body of work as to what the afterlife is like, the structure and organization of the afterlife, and what happens to us after death. So that's what Life Between Lives is in a nutshell. Of course, it's a very big topic, but I hope I've...
Yeah, well, that's interesting because, of course, consciousness is inherently subjective, but I think you gain validation when so many different people report similar types of experience, similar to a lot of experiences that, you know, people report having used Hemi Sync or being involved with Monroe Institute as well. And so that is interesting confirmation.
It is, and it's interesting that that there's so much detail. I think that's important. And similar phraseology is used. Because, of course, it's not possible when you think about if a scientist was sitting on this video call with us and they said, well, proof have you got exactly that afterlife exists? And they maybe would talk about how the brain dies and there's electrical surges and it's just all in your imagination. And I think the more subjective responses, or the more reports that we have of what people experience in detail, it helps to build a body of evidence that, you know, that what happens to us after death is real. And
But, you kind of touch upon an interesting bias that I think is built into science, in that it sort of, the vast majority of the scientific community comes from a materialist perspective. And so they have this predisposition to believe that consciousness is created in the brain from physical matter. And there frankly just isn't that much data that supports that. In fact, there's very little. And yet, that's how they want to go about understanding this thing called consciousness. That is, I think, actually what is fundamental. I mean, that is what is primary. And they want to approach it from this reductive perspective where, okay, let me find the place in the brain or, the group of cells that give rise to this phenomenon. And I just think that that is very limited.
What I don't understand is such a pessimistic viewpoint and completely without hope.
Yeah.
And it must make for a very difficult scientific career.
Yeah.
Almost trying to prove that hope doesn't exist.
Right.
Yeah, I struggle with that idea because there we are. But it is very interesting and it is complicated, and of course people do have very different views on it.
Right.
When I talk to people about life between lives, I always like to point out that this is a sort of if you like, my passion to help people to understand this, that everybody's own spiritual experience is subjective, and it can't be measured by anybody else. And what you experience is right for you. And even if it's only a little bit of light or a small feeling, and it makes you happy, why does it have to be like a book that you read?
Yeah.
Or why does it have to stand up, objectively and be measured against anything? It's important for people to be happy with their own experience and not to feel that they've got to be judged against what they read or what they see on the internet. I think that's an important point to make, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so towards the end of the exercise, you emphasize the importance of visiting this future life that you've created. And is that a sort of positive visualization technique, or are there other aspects to that, other objectives, other benefits?
Yeah, we use this technique a lot. Taking a person into their future is a way for a hypnotherapist to test if the work they've done is successful. So say, for example, just on a very simplistic level, if you were treating somebody for a simple fear or a phobia, at the end of the treatment, you would, in trance, take them through to a future, maybe 6 or 12 months in advance, and check that the work, was still valid, to check that the fear had gone. So it's something that hypnotherapists are using all the time. And of course, another mainstream treatment is called timeline therapy. So progressing into a future is very common in therapeutic terms. What it gives us the benefit for in this particular exercise is that it allows the person to visit their future when the thing that they've been working on manifesting has come into their lives. And of course we are able to do two things at this point. Firstly, to make it a very positive experience, to add colour, depth, sensation, happiness, joy, pleasure, satisfaction. I would like to bring in some relatives at this point, and I in this track. So you bring in your loved ones and your relatives, and you in your imagination you discuss how happy you are and how everything is marvellous and how well you've done, because of course it does take effort and energy and dedication to make these life changes. And so that's the primary reason. And secondly, what happens is, if there's anything that hasn't quite turned out like you thought it was going to, say, you've imagined your dream, you've energized your dream, you've brought this dream into your life, you go into your imagined future and you find out that there are some drawbacks, it gives unconscious mind an opportunity to say, hold on a minute, this isn't quite how we thought it was going to be. And of course, you can do this and find out if what you wish for is actually going to work for you in reality. And you can do it quite simply without any, without a dent in your bank balance or putting anything at risk or making any life changes. It's quite magical.
Yeah.
So you try on this future for size. For example, like buying a new coat, and then see if it fits. If it fits, you can go back to the drawing board and make some adjustments. I think it's important because, as we discussed earlier, sometimes when you wish for something, it's not always the right thing.
Yeah.
You want to do. This is a huge learning exercise as well. And you talked about consciousness, and we talked about conscious and unconscious. I believe that when we're doing an exercise like this, we're getting very close to that part of us which actually knows and understands our destiny. And we're getting closer to that immortal part of us that wants us to go in a direction which is going to fulfill what we souls really want to fulfill in this life. So it's giving you a chance really to follow a path that is true and good, and to get where you really, really want to go.
Right.
So that was my aim, and I hope it works out.
Yeah.
To make it as good as it can be.
So just one last thing that I was hoping to touch on with you. So we're using hypnotherapy techniques and Hemi Sync to kind of bypass the ordinary conscious mind, to change our programming, to change our patterning. How do you think that gets married up with the ordinary conscious mind? Because the ordinary conscious mind, it always wants to get back involved, right? It wants to evaluate this. It wants to judge it. It might, make certain judgments along the lines of, this isn't going to work, or, this is hopeless, or this is silly. Like, do you have any advice for kind of marrying up those two things?
Yeah. I mean, I have great respect for the conscious mind. It does a very, very important job. It would be easy to say, oh, the conscious mind doesn't know what it's talking about. Yeah. And it is true. I think everybody realizes it just feeds us an undiluted stream of negativity. Yeah. I certainly know my conscious mind does. However, it is the intelligent, judgmental element of our minds that is determined to keep us safe. And when we've brought up material from the unconscious, which is what we're doing when we're using hypnosis or Hemi Sync or any other kind of meditative product, it's almost as if the conscious mind then has to look at it and use its intelligence to make sense of it. So I always say to people, trust your conscious mind, trust it to look at what you've discovered and to make sense of it. So from the perspective of marrying the two parts together, I believe that both are valid, and we should trust and respect the conscious mind. But of course, when it comes to thinking about what actions you might want to take in order to turn these dreams, if you like, or this imagined material into reality, you do have to take steps, because what we're doing, what manifesting actually is turning energy into matter. It's quite, even as I say that, it sounds quite groovy. Turning energy into matter and making things happen in the material world. So there will be actions that need to be taken, and those actions will come from a deep place. And it's the conscious mind's job to decide how best to go about them.
Do you find it helpful to write things down or create a plan?
Oh yeah, sure. I think with a track like this, and in the introduction I wrote, because some people might think, well, how long is it going to take? How often do I need to listen to it? These things take time, and I've done manifesting in my own life. I know that these things take time, and we have to be patient. So I believe that the actions evolve. So it may be that your unconscious tells you to do a couple of things. The next time you listen, you get more information. I don't believe that your unconscious will give you 25 actions that need to be taken, within a 2-month period, or your dreams are, off the table. I think it's a bit more organic than that. Mm-hmm. But yes, writing things down and making a plan is always good. And patience. You see,
Yeah.
Right, I'm going to ask you. So, have you practiced with any manifesting? There's a lot of products out there to practice, and you can also just do it yourself without any guidance. Have you tried manifesting?
I mean, I've kind of lived my entire life that way, and I ask for big things too. Like I don't settle.
No.
And sometimes it takes a really long time, and your conscious mind starts to doubt and. Can become your own worst enemy in some ways. So it requires constant reinforcement. I do find it helpful to have a plan as well. So, there's kind of the step of sort of creating it in an expanded state of consciousness. And then, having to actually do stuff here in the physical realm to try to bring it about. So I think you kind of need both, at least in my experience.
But I think you'd agree it does evolve, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. It does evolve, and you have an idea about what path to take, and then after a while you realise there's a better path or a different path. And of course we also know the universe has a way of just slipping things into your life unexpectedly. So you're driving, headlong in a particular direction, and the universe just gently pulls you round and says, "Look, it's here."
Yeah.
You don't need to, dash off in that direction. So I like the way that happens.
Oh yeah, that's part of the wonder and the magic of it.
That's right. Yeah. There is an interesting saying, which is from another spiritual author that I very much admire, and the saying is, there is a time to take action and there is a time to surrender, and the trick is to know when to do either of them. So sometimes I like to just practice surrendering and see what happens, becoming very passive, and see where I end up.
Yeah.
So maybe it's enjoyable because unexpected things happen to you then. I always feel when I'm being passive and not trying to achieve anything, I find myself in places talking to people that I would never have done if I'd been, I've got to rush off and do this, I've got to complete this project, I've got to have that meeting, I've got to do this advertising. So it's an interesting thought, isn't it? But I like that. When I'm rushing off like a madwoman and my head is buzzing with thoughts and I haven't sat down for a week, I like to remind myself from time to time that surrendering is pretty good. And
I mean, there can be different ways of being that are appropriate for different stages of life and different things that you're trying to bring about in your life. And I feel like if you're paying attention, you can kind of sense into what's called for at a given point in time.
That's right, yeah. But I do like the unexpected nature of this journey, this life journey.
Oh yeah.
We think we've got it worked out.
Right.
Well, I can only talk for myself. Okay, I'm not bringing anybody else into this discussion. Not casting aspersions, but I like to think I've got it worked out, and then things change.
Yeah.
I slip on the spiritual banana skin and lying in a puddle on a part of my body that hurts. Yeah. So yeah, I don't mind that. It's good lessons.
Well, Deborah, thanks again for taking the time to speak with me and for reaching out to us and creating this exercise with us. I think it'll help a lot of people, and I think this talk will too. So if you're listening and you liked it, you think it's useful, please share it up. Check us out online, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, Garrett.
Thanks, Deborah.
It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Likewise. Talk to you all next time.